You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome. Tonight, as the gentle rain falls, we have 3 chilling stories for you. These are tales of quiet dread, strange happenings in everyday places, and things that lurk just out of sight in the darkness. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let the rain and these whispers guide you into the deeper hours of the night. Story 1. The Trail of Whispers. Liam loved hiking. He loved the quiet of the deep forest, the crunch of leaves under his boots, the fresh smell of pine. This time, he was on a new trail, deep in an ancient forest, known for its huge, old trees. He was alone, just him and his backpack, ready for a peaceful few days away from city noise. The first day was perfect. He hiked for hours, the sun filtering through the thick canopy of leaves, making patterns on the forest floor. He set up his tent by a clear stream, cooked a simple meal. The whispers changed. It wasn't just the wind anymore. It was a faint, low humming coming from deep within the forest, echoing between the trees. It was a beautiful, haunting sound, like many voices singing a sad, wordless tune. Liam frowned. He sat up in his tent, listening. The humming grew louder, then faded, then returned. It made the hair on his arms stand up. He told himself it was just the acoustics of the forest, the wind playing tricks. He tried to go back to sleep, but the humming kept him awake for hours. The next morning, as he packed his camp, he noticed something odd. On a tree near his tent, carefully tied to a low branch, was a small, intricately woven figure made of twigs and dried leaves. It looked like a tiny, twisted person, with empty holes for eyes. Liam felt a chill. He hadn't seen it the night before. He left it there, hurrying to start his hike. As he walked, he started seeing more of these figures. They hung from branches, stood at trees, or lay half hidden in the undergrowth. Each one was slightly different, but all were made of twigs and leaves. All had empty eyes, and all seemed to be watching him as he passed. The forest felt different now, no longer peaceful, but watchful. The humming continued, always present, a constant background noise that seemed to follow him. It was everywhere, and sometimes he heard other sounds mixed within the hum, a faint rustling, like something dragging itself through the dry leaves, just out of sight, a soft, wet click, like bones tapping together. Liam felt a growing sense of dread. He tried to walk faster, but the forest seemed endless. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining, blocking out the sunlight. The air grew cold and heavy, even though it was a warm day. One afternoon, he came to a clearing. In the center, there was a single ancient tree, even larger and more gnarled than the other, reached out like hundreds of grasping arms, and hanging from every single branch, swaying gently in the unseen breeze, were hundreds of the twig and leaf figures. They filled the clearing, their empty eyes seeming to stare at him. And from the base of that massive tree, the humming was deafening. It vibrated through the ground, through his feet, rising up through his body. It was no longer a sad song. It was a vast, ancient chant. Thousands of voices murmuring in unison, pressing against his mind. Then from the center of the humming, a new sound emerged, a voice. It was deep and resonant, too large for any human throat, yet it spoke clearly, directly into his mind. "You hear, you see, now join," Liam screamed, a raw, terrified sound. He turned and ran, not caring about the trail, just crashing through the dense forest, tripping over roots, falling, getting back up. The humming followed him, vibrating in his ears, and he could feel the rustling of count. small things pursuing him through the undergrowth. He felt their tiny, unseen fingers brushing against his legs, his back. He ran for what felt like hours until he finally burst out of the trees onto a paved road. He didn't stop running until he reached the nearest town, gasping for breath, collapsing on the sidewalk. Liam never went back into that forest. He moved far away to a place where there were no tall trees, no ancient woods. He sleeps with the lights on now, unable to escape the feeling of being watched. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right and he's alone at night, he hears it. A faint, low humming carried on the breeze, coming from somewhere far away. And sometimes, he catches a glimpse in the shadows of his room. A small, intricately woven figure, made of twigs and leaves, sitting on his windowsill, its empty eyes staring. And he knows with a bone-chilling certainty that the forest isn't just a place. It's a living, breathing thing, and it's always waiting for him to return, waiting for him to join the chorus of whispers. Story 2: The Abandoned Cabin Supper. Sarah and David loved exploring abandoned places, old buildings, forgotten structures. They saw the beauty in decay, the stories left behind. On a long weekend, they decided to hike deep into a secluded forest to find an old, rumored hunting cabin, supposedly untouched for decades. The hike was long, the trail almost gone, overgrown with thick bushes and fallen trees. But after hours of pushing through the dense woods, they found it. A small wooden cabin, leaning to one side, its windows shattered, its door hanging open like a gaping mouth. It looked exactly as they had imagined, completely forgotten, swallowed by nature. They pushed the door open further, stepping inside. The air was cold, damp, and smelled strongly of old wood and something else. Something faintly sweet and earthy. Dust covered everything. A single, rickety wooden table stood in the middle of the main room, and 2 chairs lay overturned beside it. David, always the brave one, went to explore the other rooms. Sarah stayed in the main room, taking photos. She noticed something odd on the table. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but on one side of the table, there was a clear circle, as if someone had recently wiped it clean. And in the center of that circle, there was a single, perfectly clean, porcelain plate. It was empty. Sarah frowned. That was strange. Why would one plate be clean in a cabin untouched for decades? She called out to David, but he was already deep inside the house, his voice muffled as he called back, exploring. She shrugged, deciding it was just an old trick of the light, or maybe an animal had disturbed the dust. She continued taking pictures, but then she heard a faint clink from the next room, followed by a soft, rhythmic chewing sound. It was distinct, wet, and unsettling. David came back into the main room, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Sounded like someone eating." Sarah nodded, her heart starting to pound. "I found this," she said, pointing to the clean plate. They decided to leave. The cabin felt different now, no longer abandoned, but occupied. As they turned to go, they heard a loud thump from the kitchen, followed by a low, contented sigh. It sounded like someone had just finished a large meal. They ran, scrambling out of the cabin, crashing through the bushes, not daring to look back. They hiked through the growing darkness of the forest, fear pushing them forward. They reached their car just as the rain started to fall, drumming hard on the car roof. They drove away quickly, leaving the silent, dark forest behind. They didn't stop until they were back in the safety of their own home. They tried to forget the cabin. They told themselves it was just their minds playing tricks in the isolated woods. But the memory of the clean plate and the chewing sounds haunted them. A week later, David was cooking dinner. Sarah was setting the table. She pulled out 2 plates from the cupboard, One of them felt strangely cold and had a faint, sweet, earthy smell. She frowned. It was one of her good porcelain plates, the same kind she had seen in the cabin. She had bought them recently. It shouldn't smell like that. She looked at the plate. In the very center, where food would normally sit, there was a faint, almost invisible ring, like a dark stain. And inside the ring, a single, perfectly clear footprint. Not a human foot. It was small, round, and had only 3 toes. Sarah gasped, dropping the plate. It shattered on the floor. That night, the rain fell softly outside. They sat in their living room, trying to calm down. Then they heard it. From their kitchen, a faint clink, followed by a soft, rhythmic chewing sound. And then, a low, contented sigh. They looked at each other, wide-eyed with terror. The chewing continued, getting louder, closer. They heard it move into their hallway. Slurp, chew, clink. It was moving towards the living room. Sarah and David scrambled under their coffee table, huddled together, trembling. They could hear the sounds clearly now. The wet chewing, the soft slurping, the heavy breathing. It was just outside the living room door. Then the sounds stopped. A profound silence fell over the house. After a long, terrifying minute, David slowly, cautiously, peeked over the edge of the coffee table. The living room was empty. The door was open. Everything seemed normal. But on their perfectly clean coffee table, in the center, was a single, perfectly clean porcelain plate. It was empty. But around it, a faint, sweet, earthy smell lingered.
And on the table, where the plate had sat, was a thin layer of dust. And in the dust, just like in the cabin, a clear circle, as if someone had recently wiped it clean. Sarah and David still live in their house. They never go near abandoned places again. They always keep their kitchen clean, their plates put away. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the house is completely quiet, they hear it. A faint clink from the kitchen, a soft, wet chewing sound, and a low, contented sigh. And they know, with a bone-chilling certainty, that the cabin wasn't abandoned. It was just waiting, and whatever ate there found its way out. And now it knows where they live, and it's always hungry. Story 3, The Echoing Closet. The new apartment was small but cozy, perfect for Liam. He was a quiet person who enjoyed his own space. The only strange thing was the closet in the hallway. It was just an ordinary closet, meant for coats, but it always felt colder than the rest of the apartment, even with the heating on full blast. Liam didn't think much of it at first. Old buildings often had cold spots, but then he started hearing things from inside it. A faint drip, 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 like water falling, even though there were no pipes nearby. He checked inside, but it was dry, just a few dusty old hangers. The next night, the sound was clearer. It was definitely a drip, but it sounded strangely heavy, like thick drops. And then he heard something else, a soft, wet, slithering noise, as if something was slowly dragging itself across the closet floor. Liam frowned. He opened the closet door quickly, but it was empty, just shadows. He told himself it was just the wind or the old building settling. But the sounds from the closet continued, growing more real, more chilling. Every night, the dripping and slithering would get louder. Sometimes he'd hear a low, wet gurgle, like someone swallowing something thick and unpleasant. It made his stomach turn. He started having trouble sleeping, his ears straining against the night silence, always listening for the closet. He tried to block it out. He pushed his heavy bookshelf against the closet door. He even put thick blankets over the cracks, hoping to muffle the sounds. But it was useless. The sounds seemed to go through the walls, through the very air. One stormy night, the rain was pounding against his windows, a frantic drumbeat. Liam was huddled on his sofa, trying to read, when he heard a new sound from the closet.
It was a faint, almost musical humming, a low, mournful tune that seemed to vibrate through the floor. It was beautiful, but terribly sad, and it filled him with a deep, aching loneliness. Then, the humming changed. It became clearer, and he heard distinct voices woven into the melody. They were whispering, countless voices, speaking in a language he didn't know, but the words felt like they were pressing against his mind, pushing in. The sounds were no longer just coming from the closet. They seemed to be coming from inside his head. He stumbled to the closet, drawn by a terrible, unexplainable force. He pulled the bookshelf away, his hands shaking. He tore off the blankets. He pulled the closet door open. The closet was completely dark inside, a deep, solid black that seemed to absorb the light from his apartment. But the cold was intense, like stepping into a freezer. And from that profound darkness, a faint swirling mist began to rise, glowing with a soft, sickly green light. From within the mist, he saw movement. Not distinct shapes, but immense undulating shadows, shifting and coiling within the green light. They were vast, shapeless forms, yet he could feel their presence, cold and hungry. And then he heard the sounds clearly. Thousands of voices, whispering, murmuring, crying, all at once. And that deep, wet gurgling sound. As he stared, paralyzed by fear, one of the vast shadows within the mist seemed to swell, growing larger. It solidified, forming a huge, dark eye, glowing red, that opened slowly in the swirling green mist, staring directly at him. Liam screamed, a raw, desperate sound. He slammed the closet door shut, pushing the bookshelf back against it with all his strength. He could still feel the cold from behind the wood, still hear the faint humming and whispering coming from within. He never went near the closet again. He tried to ignore it. He put his bed in the living room, trying to get as far away from it as possible. But the apartment felt smaller now, filled with a constant sense of cold. Liam still lives in that apartment. He's still Pa. But he never uses the hallway closet. He avoids looking at it, even during the day. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the apartment is completely quiet, he hears it. A faint drip, 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 a wet slithering, and that low, mournful humming coming from behind the sealed door. And sometimes, when he closes his eyes, he sees it. A huge, red, glowing eye, opening slowly in a swirling green mist. He knows the closet is not just a closet. It's a door, and whatever is inside is waiting for him to open it again. And he wonders how long he can keep it shut. Story 4, The Midnight Passenger. The old bus route ran through the quiet suburbs, mostly empty late at night. Sarah was a driver on the graveyard shift, used to the silent streets and the occasional tired passenger. It was a peaceful job, usually, but there was one passenger she started to notice. He would always board at the last stop on her route, just outside the old cemetery gates. He was a very old man, dressed in a neat, old-fashioned suit with kind, tired eyes. He would always sit in the very last seat by the window and never speak. He would ride the entire loop and get off at the same cemetery stop at 1:45 a.m. He always paid with the exact change, carefully counted out. Sarah thought it was strange, but harmless. Maybe he was a night watchman or just an old man who enjoyed a quiet ride. She just drove her route, but the bus started feeling different when he was on board. The air would grow colder, even on warm nights. The streetlights outside would flicker as the bus passed them. And sometimes, she would hear a faint whisper coming from the back of the bus, like dry leaves rustling, even though the old man never moved. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it was just the old bus, or her imagination. But the feeling of being watched, of something else on the bus, grew stronger. The old man never looked at her directly. His gaze was always fixed on the window, staring out at the dark, empty streets. But she could feel his presence, cold and heavy, pressing down from the back of the bus. Then the bus began to change when he was on it. The other seats, usually empty, would sometimes appear to have faint shadows sitting in them, just at the edge of her vision. They would flicker and disappear if she looked directly. Once, she swore she saw a faded, old-fashioned hat on an empty seat beside the old man, only for it to vanish. It was as if other passengers were riding with him, unseen. The bus, too, seemed to grow colder, filled with the scent of damp earth and something sweet, like old decaying flowers. And the whispering from the back of the bus grew louder, clearer. It was many voices now, murmuring, humming, sometimes a faint, mournful sigh. They never spoke words she could understand, but the sound filled the bus, a constant, eerie chorus. One particularly rainy night, the storm was intense, blurring the road ahead. The bus was completely empty, except for her and the old man in the back. He boarded at 12:15 a.m. as usual. But tonight, as the bus pulled away from the cemetery stop, a new sound filled the air. A low, guttural moan coming from the back of the bus. Sarah looked in her rear-view mirror. The old man was still sitting in his seat, motionless, staring out the window. But around him, the faint shadows in the other seats were much clearer. They were outlines of people, transparent, shimmering, swaying with the movement of the bus. And they were all looking at him, at the old man, their forms leaning towards him, as if listening. As she watched, paralyzed by fear, the old man slowly, very slowly, turned his head. His eyes, usually kind, were now completely black, like deep holes, and a wide, horrible grin stretched across his face, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. Then he spoke. His voice was not old and tired. It was deep, echoing, and filled with a cold, ancient power. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the bus. The journey is long, and they are hungry. Sarah screamed, a raw, terrified sound. She slammed on the brakes, the bus skidding on the wet road. She fumbled with the door, pushing it open, and stumbled out into the pouring rain. She ran, not caring where she went, just away from the bus, away from the grinning old man, away from the whispering shadows. She never went back to her bus route. She quit her job. She moved to a different city, far away from any bus routes, far from any cemeteries. But sometimes, when the rain falls and the night is quiet, she hears it. A faint, low humming, like an old bus engine idling. And sometimes, she catches a glimpse in her own reflection. Not her face, but a brief flicker of wide, black eyes and a terrifying grin. And she knows, with a bone-chilling certainty, that the old man isn't just a passenger. He's a driver. And the bus, it's always moving. And one night, she fears, it will pull up to her door, and he will be waiting, ready for her to board, for the longest journey of all. Story 5. The Silent Call. Mia lived in a quiet suburban house, a simple life. She often used a baby monitor, even though her kids were grown, to listen to her elderly mother in the next room, just to make sure she was okay. It was a comfort hearing her gentle breathing, knowing she was safe. But then, the monitor started picking up a new sound. It was a faint, high-pitched whimper, barely audible, coming from her mother's room. Mia frowned. Her mother was sleeping peacefully. She checked on her. She was fine, quiet. Mia thought the monitor must be picking up interference. The next night, the whimper was clearer. It was definitely a child's whimper, soft and sad, quickly followed by a strange, hollow click, like a small bone snapping. Mia felt a prickle of unease. There were no children in the house. She unplugged the monitor. But the next night, as the rain began to fall softly outside, she heard it again, the high-pitched whimper coming from her mother's room. But now, it seemed to come from the very air around her. It was in her mind. The sounds became more frequent, more unsettling. The child's whimper would repeat, sometimes followed by that hollow click. Other times, she would hear a faint, distant singing, a mournful, wordless tune that seemed to pull at her heart. She started feeling cold in her house, even with the heat on. The silence of the night felt heavy, filled with unseen presences. She tried to talk to her mother about it, but her mother, in her old age, seemed lost in her own thoughts, barely responding. Mia felt alone, trapped with the unsettling sounds. The sounds grew. They were no longer just whimpers and clicks. She started hearing a soft, rhythmic thump-thump, like something small being gently bounced, from her mother's room. And then a faint, tiny laugh, cold and hollow, following the thump. It was the sound of a child playing, but there was no child. One particularly dark night, the rain was pounding against the windows, a furious roar. Mia was in her living room, unable to sleep when she heard a new sound from her mother's room. It was a voice, a child's voice, young, clear, filled with a terrible, innocent glee. "Mama, play with me." Mia's blood ran cold. That voice, it wasn't her mother's. It was the child from the whimper, from the laugh. It was in her mother's room. She crept to her mother's door, pushing it open slowly. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the nightlight. Her mother was asleep in her bed, breathing softly. Everything seemed normal. But then, Mia heard it. The soft, rhythmic thump-thump. It was coming from under her mother's bed. And then, the child's voice again, clearer now, right beneath the bed. "Mama, don't leave me." As Mia stared, paralyzed, the bed began to shudder faintly. The blankets moved, slowly, as if something was pulling them from underneath. A small, pale hand appeared from under the bed, its fingers grasping at the blanket. It was a child's hand, tiny and white, but its grip was surprisingly strong. And then she saw it. From under the bed, a single painted eye, round and black, slowly opened, staring directly at her. It wasn't a human eye. It was a doll's eye, but it was looking at her, and it was full of a cold, hungry intelligence. Mia screamed, a raw, primal sound. She ran from the room, from the house, into the pouring rain, not caring where she went, just away from the screaming child's voice, away from the doll's black eye. She never went back to that house. Her mother was found safe by neighbors the next day, confused but unharmed. Mia tried to explain, but no one believed her. They thought she was just exhausted. Mia lives in a new place now, far away from that house. But sometimes, especially when the rain falls softly and the night is quiet, she hears it. A faint whimper, a soft giggle, coming from the empty room next to hers. And sometimes she feels it. A small, cold hand brushing against her ankle in the darkness. And she knows, with a bone-chilling certainty, that the doll isn't in the house anymore. It followed her, and it's always waiting. Waiting for her to fall asleep. Waiting for her to play. You've been listening to Sleep to Shadows. May your dreams be calm, and your night undisturbed.